Alright guys, let's get into it. Let's start creating our project, and I'm going to keep the final project, I'm going to keep it open in a tab so we can kind of guide ourselves and see what we're doing. I have the whole structure of the project here. We have our main index file, we have our CSS folder with one style sheet, and all our media queries will be conducted in this style sheet. For images, we have the logo, which is quite big. I guess, right here, 640 by 268. And that allows us to have flexible images, which is pretty much required for a good responsive design. And then we just have a texture for the background, which will repeat. We have a JS folder, and we just have jQuery in there. We won't be using any jQuery in this project, but it's always good to have just in case you want to. This is something that you could add to as a framework or as a website. Maybe add a big slider or something like that. And then I have just a resources folder, which just has the logo PSD. It's for Photoshop if you want to maybe tweak it a little bit. And so let's get to it. I'm going to create a new folder and call it Workspace. And we want to just pretty much copy this structure. So let's create an index.html file. And we want a CSS folder, we want a JavaScript folder, and an images folder. We don't need to do the resources. So the images I'm actually just going to copy over. And jQuery I'm gonna bring over, because obviously this isn't going to be changed at all. Alright, so the rest we'll have to do on our own. We're going to be using Notepad++, so I'm going to open up the index file. So every HTML5 document needs to start out with a doc type, so we just want to say doc type HTML, and we want our HTML tags. We need a head and a body, and I'm obviously assuming that you know at least the basics of HTML. We'll give it a title, call it Risk Project. And before we go to the body, we want to link our style sheet. So we want to use a link tag with the rel attribute, which is going to be equal to style sheet. And we want to link to it, so we need href. It's going to be in a CSS folder and called style.css. And then we want a type attribute, which will be text/CSS. Alright, and let's include the jQuery, so we need to open a script tag with an src attribute pointing to js/jQuery.js. Okay, and actually, you know what, we are using jQuery. We're using jQuery for the resizer. This window width. Forgot all about that. So let's add that code real quick. I'm gonna open up a script tag. And what we're gonna do is create a variable called show width. And whoops, we don't need that equal sign there. So variable show width, is going to be equal to 1. So this is just so we can shut it on and off. If we want to shut it off, we just need to make this a 0. So let's create a if statement. Actually, let me add a comment here. Toggle for with display. So now we want an if statement, and what we want to say is if show width is equal to 1, then we want to run some code. We want to use jQuery, so we need to do document dot ready, and inside the ready we need a function. So what we want to do is say window, want the window object, dot resize, and inside resize we want a function. We need to create a new variable we'll call not width, and that's going to be equal to the window's width. So we need to do window dot width, and now all we want to do now is put it on the page somewhere. So we're going to say document dot get element by ID, and we're going to create a div which will be, let me see, we'll call it output width. Let me make this bigger. Alright, so output width, and then we're going to use the .inner HTML for JavaScript. So inner HTML, and that's going to be equal to the HTML we want to put in here. So we're just going to say window width, let's see, window width, and we just want to concatenate here. So we want, after our quotes, we need a plus sign to concatenate JavaScript, and we just want to spit out the width. So we have to use width and then toString, and that should do it. So that should work. When we get to it, we'll test it when we get to creating this div here. But we're going to start now in the body, and actually the first thing we want to put is that div. So let's do that. We're going to say div ID equals output width, and then we're going to close the div. So let's try that out and see if that works. Let's see, we want to go to our workspace, index HTML, and once we start moving it, it's working. So that's all set. Pretty easy. And that's all the JavaScript and jQuery that we're going to be doing. That's it. So if you're not comfortable with JavaScript, then don't worry about it. Alright, so next we want to start building the container. So let's make a div with the ID of container. And the version that you get in your program files is going to be better commented. It's just going to, basically have better comments. I'm not going to do much commenting in this video. So don't worry if it's a little different in your project files. What I want to do now is use the HTML5, one of the new tags called header, and I'm going to give this a class, and I'm going to call it main header. So this is where the logo goes, so let's add that. I'm going to say image, and I'm going to give the image an ID of logo. And we need a source tag, which is going to be pointed to images/logo.png. And then we'll just do an alt, and we'll just say risk project. Okay, so we have our logo. Also in the header we want our navigation, and we're going to use the HTML5 tag called nav, and we're also going to give this a class called main nav, because we could have different navigations. We could have a footer nav, things like that, so we want to give classes to these things. And I know that a lot of developers will just use header or just use nav, and then style in the CSS using just header and nav. But if you have more than one of these elements, then they're both going to be styled, so it's good to have a class on each. And you'll see, because we actually use header again within the articles. Alright, so we have a nav with the class of main nav. So let's close that off. And inside, we don't want to close it with div. So inside of here we want a unordered list. And we want some list tags with links inside of them. So href okay, so we'll say this one is going to be home, and let me just copy this, and I'm going to add in the text that I have. Learn, brainstorm, and these aren't going to be actual pages, just some words that I thought fit well. Let's see, collaborate, I can't even spell, collaborate, and teach. Alright, and so what I want to do is I want to give the current page that we're on a class, and that's so we can style the active menu item or page. So let's give this a class of active. Okay, so now that we're not going to actually make pages out of these links, we're always going to be on the home page basically, so that's why we're going to put the active class on the home link. So we have our nav, it's finished, the header is finished. Next we want the main div. So div ID equals main. And let's just take a look at this so far. I'm sure it's not looking... Alright, so you can see all we have is our full-sized image and an unordered list of links. So let's go back, and now the main div is gonna, let me just show you. The main div is gonna hold all of this. Okay, it's gonna contain the main content and the sidebar. So inside of that, inside of main, we want to do the content div. So div ID content. So in the content div we're going to have articles, so we can use the HTML5 tag article. Okay, so we're going to have article, and we'll give this a class of art1. And in our article we're going to have a header, and of course this is going to have a class of art header. Inside of the header we're going to have an h2 tag with the class of title, and we're going to have the title, which will be a link. So we want to do a link. And inside the link and the title, we're just going to say first post. And also in the article header, we want to put the author information, which we'll put in a span tag. And we're putting it in a span so we can actually style this part of the article. So we're going to say created by Brad Traversy on October 7, 2013. Alright, so that's it for the article header. Now we want to add basically our articles. So I'm going to have a p tag. Why do I have caps lock? Alright, and I'm just going to copy some content, just some dummy content real quick. Actually, I'm going to copy the whole article. Okay. So what we have is just 2 paragraphs, and then under that we have a link with the class of read more, which has the text read more. Okay. Now let's copy this whole thing, and right underneath we're going to paste it, and we're just going to change some things. This is going to be art 2. Art header stays the same. Title, let's call this one second post. Span, author information's the same. Let me just grab some different content because I think it looks better when you have different content. You don't repeat the same thing. So alright, so that looks good. So same thing, 2 paragraphs with a read more link. So let's save this and see what's going on. Okay, so we have our first and second post. Now what we want to do now is create the sidebar. So we have to make sure that we are at the right div. So Notepad++, you can actually highlight a div and it'll find the ending div. You can also click on the ending and it'll find the start div. So content, that's what we want after the content div. We want to create a sidebar, and actually we don't want to use div for this. We want to use the HTML5 tag of a side. So we're going to say a side ID equals sidebar. So here's where we want to put our sidebar content. So let's look at the outcome, and you can see we have these separate blocks. So we have 3 of these blocks. So I'm going to create a div with the class of block. And the reason this is a class and not an ID is because we have multiple blocks. So inside of here, we're going to give it a title, say an H2 tag, and we're going to call this top sidebar. And then we want the content, which I'm going to just copy. Alright, so we just have a title and then our content. So let's copy the block because we need 3 of these. And if you needed to single out certain blocks, let's say you wanted to color the second one differently, you could just add another class, or you could add an ID. So let's see, mid sidebar, bottom sidebar. And let's just make it look a little different. It's just an OCD thing I have. I don't like using the same exact content everywhere. Alright, so let's save that. Take a look. Okay, we have our sidebars. Obviously, they're not on the side yet because we haven't styled anything. Alright, so this video is getting kind of long, so I'm going to hurry it up. This is the main div. Alright, so after the main div, we just want to add a class, and I'm going to call this CLR. This is, I like to use this to clear the floats, and we'll add that CSS I think in the next section. And under that, we want a footer. You can use the HTML5 tag footer. And I'm just going to put in a copyright. Alright, so I think that should do it. Let me save this. Alright, so we have our footer, and by default, with no styling, even if we start resizing the window, you can see that the text it's resizing. So that's why we want to keep a fluid layout. We don't want to add any restrictions on widths. So that's what we'll do in the next section. We'll work on creating a nice fluid layout.